Hello, hello, my name is Clark Heron, aka the Hairy Hobo, and welcome to a final edition, or close to final edition, of the Final Drive, my prediction show for the college football playoffs. We are the second to last rankings of the season. The last ones will be on December 2nd. That is a Sunday at noon, and I will keep everybody posted about my predictions prior to that. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that Saturday evening or early Sunday, but we'll talk about that at a different time. As for the rankings this week, those will be presented tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on ESPN, along with my rapid reaction video based on my predictions that I'm going to talk about here tonight. And what a weekend we had, and if this is going to be as close as chaos is going to happen, well, it was a pretty good weekend to have. 3 of the top 10 teams of the rankings lost this week, and they will directly affect who's going to be in the top 10. Now, those 3 teams that lost was Washington State against Washington in the Apple Cup on Friday, LSU in that 7-overtime thriller against Texas A&M, and then Michigan, well, they were there in Columbus, but they did end up losing quite heavily to Ohio State. So that being said, we've got... Sorry about that, disconnected there. We got a little bit of a logjam towards the end of the top 10. It's going to make the... This internet is crazy. It's going to give the committee a little bit of an issue, a lot of debate about exactly who's going to be, at least in my opinion, the final 3 slots. I think the top 7 are pretty well set. And remember, this late in the season, the committee is going to be worried about, obviously, the eye test this late in the year. They have a pretty good idea of exactly who you are as a team, but they're also going to be looking at trying to get this rankings as close to the final rankings as possible. They kind of want to go into the last week kind of already assuming who's going to win and have their final 4 set, so there's not too many changes needed to be made. That being said, it's going to be a little tough. Again, very little bit of a log jam, because once you get to 8, 9, and 10, you start looking at teams that obviously lost or have 3 or more losses, which is going to make things a little bit difficult. Now, if you kept track of exactly how well I've done this season, the first rankings I was at 40%, I moved up to 50%, then 100%, and then last week I was at 80%. So hopefully I can get back on track to get 100% this week. But before we start there, let's talk about 2 teams that are going to be just on the outside looking in. And again, this is where the log jam happens, and it's very difficult to figure out who's going to be just on the outside looking in. The AP poll came out, and if you do pay attention to that, teams like Washington and Texas moved up quite largely in those rankings. And I've never been big on the AP polls. It's a big popularity contest, but it's not out of the realm of possibility just because of how many 3-loss teams sit in that area trying to figure out who's in and who's out. So at number 12, this is a team that I'm still kind of undecided, still trying to figure things out as I go about it. But I think at number 12, I like Texas in this spot. And the reason I'm going to have Texas over Penn State, I think Penn State's going to move down 1 spot. Even though they've won 3 straight, they beat a Maryland team that almost beat Ohio State, which obviously Penn State almost beat Ohio State as well. But I like Texas here. Texas has played well, even though they just barely beat Kansas by 7 this past week. Again, it's a little bit of a logjam. You start looking at resumes a little bit closer, trying to figure out exactly who they've played, who they haven't played, and again, Texas is a nice little spot there. Would not surprise me, at least, if they kept Penn State at 12. But I think I'd like Texas here. At number 11, this is where I think Washington State falls down to. They lost in the Apple Cup by 13 against Washington in what seemed to be the snowball at that point. But they really didn't play very well at all, and that loss clearly takes them out of the top 10, out of any consideration. Obviously, the win for Washington puts them into the Pac-12 championship against Utah, a team that they beat earlier this season, so a little bit of a rematch there. But for Washington State falling down to number 11, it would not surprise me in the least if they fell down even further, maybe even 12 or 13. Again, a lot of these teams interchangeable at this point. So now let's get to the top 10. And again, I think the top 7 are pretty well set. So let's start off with number 10. Make it super simple. At number 10, this is where I think LSU falls. Now, you're going to say, well, it took them 7 overtimes to lose 74-72. Yeah, you're right. But again, they only lost by 2 to another ranked team. And you start looking at their resume, they easily have the best resume in college football. They have 3 ranked losses this season. Yes, it was a 7 overtime thriller against Texas A&M, who was ranked. They lost by a shutout fashion to the number 1 team in the nation, which, when you look at it, they lost by 29. Alabama's smallest margin of victory all season long was against Texas A&M by 22, I believe. And again, a decent loss to have. If you're going to lose via shutout, it's going to be the best team in the nation. It better be, at least. And then they lost to Florida by single digits as well. And again, they've got a 20-point win over Georgia. I like them sitting at number 10. That third loss does hurt them quite well. But I still think the committee is going to value their resume overall, especially now they're going to start being compared to other 3-loss teams, and having that resume is going to be key this late in the season. At number 9, this is a team that I thought you could potentially move them up to 8. You could have them at 10, but I think this is where Michigan falls to, from number 4 all the way down to number 9. Their dismantling at the hands of the Buckeyes this weekend was very hard to watch if you were a Michigan fan. Their defense having key losses of Winovich getting a little bit banged up, as well as Devin Bush leaving that game fairly early. But still, they had a little bit of a chance late in that second quarter when Ohio State kind of let them back into that game. But then when you don't score any points in the third, it kind of puts a downer on the second half of that game. And obviously they lose quite largely, giving up 62 points. Easily their most this entire season. They struggled. They struggled quite mightily. But I like the committee keeping them at number 9. They are the best 2-loss team remaining in the nation. And again, when you're on the benefactor of having two teams lose behind you, it makes it for a little bit easier landing. You could easily see them falling a little bit further just because of that blowout loss. But I like Michigan sitting at number 9. At number 8, this is a team that, again, could easily be switched with Michigan. Could be switched, well, really with Michigan. This will be Florida at number 8. And the reason they're going to be ranked this high is simply because their win over LSU is one of their key wins this season. And, again, you have a lot of 3-loss teams, even 4-loss teams. You're trying to compare. The committee's taking a look at these teams and now having to take even a closer look at their opponents, who they've played, who they've won, who they've lost, that sort of thing. And I think just by the fact that LSU lost, which team they beat, and then Washington State lost as well, they become the beneficiaries of sitting at number 11 and kind of creeping up over the tops of Michigan. So, for those 3 spots, we have at number 10, LSU, number 9, Michigan, and at number 8, Florida. So, what about that top 7? Well, again, I think everybody just kind of slides on up a little bit. At number 7 would be UCF. Unfortunately, they lost Mackenzie Milton, their starting quarterback, for the rest of the season with it seems like a very terrible knee injury. Hopefully, he heals up and gets back to being himself and being able to walk, let alone play football. That's the unfortunate part. They still are undefeated, and the committee is going to be very interested in this week in their conference championship game against Memphis, a team that, with Mackenzie Milton, only won by 1 point early on. So it's going to be very interesting, and the committee member did come out and say that they're going to be quite interested in this game to see exactly how well this backup does. If he does as good, if not better, you could see them jump a team like Ohio State, who plays in the Big Ten championship game, and potentially getting into a much bigger bowl. But the committee is going to be looking at this game to see exactly how well he does and have a great comparison point to what the team looks like with the backup versus the starter versus a common opponent. At number 6, this is where Ohio State jumps up to. From number 10, they had a monster game, like I mentioned earlier, against Michigan, destroying them 62-39. And they looked like the team that everybody's been waiting on from the very beginning of this season. There's been games that their offense has looked phenomenal, then there's been games that their defense has looked phenomenal, but they haven't really quite put it together until this game. And this was the reason that I think the committee will put them up at number 6. A great win, a huge win against a top 5 opponent, and they will look to be potential Big Ten champions if they can win in Indy against newcomer Northwestern. At number 5, Oklahoma. Again, the committee is keeping a very close eye on this team simply because Oklahoma can't play defense. They haven't done it all year long, but yet they keep outscoring people, and this is very key. The committee is very high on Kyler Murray and that type of offense. They were the number 1 offense in the nation, with Ohio State being number 2. And if things work out just a little bit differently than the committee likes, you could be having a huge debate over either Oklahoma or Ohio State, but that's a debate for another day. As for now, I like Oklahoma sitting at number 5. Number 4, this is a vacated spot by Michigan. Georgia just simply slides into place. They will be facing number 1, and I'll talk about them a little bit later, and the SEC championship game. But for Georgia, simple slide up. They beat Georgia Tech this week pretty handily. I think it was 45-21, and they have a huge opportunity in front of them to lock themselves in the Final Four with a win against the SEC opponent, and we'll get to them just here shortly. At number 3 is Notre Dame, holding on to their spot, and I think just by the skin of their teeth. Yes, they've played probably the most consistent football all year long. It's not flashy, it's not showy, it's not going to win any type of huge offensive or defensive awards, but they just keep winning. And yes, a 7-point win isn't as flashy as probably what the committee was kind of hoping for from Notre Dame, but having that goose egg next to your record is huge and will keep them solid at the number 3 position. And number 2, Clemson, they handled South Carolina in their rivalry game in the Palmetto Bowl this past weekend. They will be sitting at number 2. And then clearly at number 1, no change there, is Alabama. And again, this SEC championship game is going to decide quite a bit of fates. Everybody behind Georgia wants Georgia to lose. And really at this point, even if Alabama loses, especially in a close game, there's a very good chance that Alabama could easily stay within the top 4 and probably just slide to number 4. But we'll see what happens this weekend with championship weekend. So, quick little recap. At number 10, LSU. Number 9, Michigan. Number 8, Florida. Number 7, UCF. Number 6, Ohio State. Number 5, Oklahoma. Number 4, Georgia. Number 3, Notre Dame. Number 2, Clemson. And number 1, Alabama. And again, 80% last week. Hopefully I can get 100% this week. It is going to be tough. I think the 8, 9, and 10 spot is going to be a huge topic of conversation for the committee this week, just because now you're comparing a team that got blown out, that is a 2-loss team in Michigan, versus 3-loss teams that are kind of just benefactors of Washington State losing, as well as LSU losing, as well as Michigan losing this past week. It is a little bit of carnage back there. There's not really a team that has separated themselves amongst those group of 3-loss teams. That could change this weekend, however, with Texas facing Oklahoma, a team they beat already. They could hand them a second loss this season. You also have another 3-loss team in Washington that moves on to the Pac-12 championship game against Utah. That could, if in the minds of the committee, maybe move up to 12 this week. Could find themselves in a New Year's Six Bowl. Especially with a win, more than likely they're going to be headed to the Rose Bowl in that scenario. And then you have another 3-loss team. They're just going to be sitting there. Like Florida's going to be sitting there. They don't have any other games. Penn State's going to be doing the same. West Virginia as well. It's all going to be very interesting to see what the committee views. Again, I think at this point of the year, they're looking at the eye test. They're going to be looking at resumes, especially if the eye test is about the same at this time of year. But they want to make sure these rankings are about as close as final as possible, to where once these championship games get played, you're going to know exactly who's going to be in and who's going to be out. As for now, my name is Clark Heron, a.k.a. the Hairy Hobo, and I'm out.